All right, guys, today we're going to be making Welch's grape juice. So we have all of our stuff here. We're going to make 2 gallons of it, or at least start with 2 gallons of Welch's grape juice. We're going to add some sugar to get our alcohol content up. I'm going to show you how to test it with the hydrometer to see where we start, how much sugar to add. I want to get this to 14%, 14.5%. Probably 14.5%. So I want to show you how much sugar to add to get it there. We've got some items here I'm going to point out to show you that it's kind of optional if you want to. Some of the stuff is going to be a necessity, but let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we have our items on the table that we're going to be using today. A little tasting glass to taste the grape juice and see what it actually tastes like. The yeast is going to be a necessity. I'm going to be using the Lavin K1 V116. That's because we're going to be setting a higher alcohol content for this at about 14.5 to 15%. This is a strong fermenter, especially in acidic environments, which this is going to be. We have our hydrometer here, which is going to test our initial sugar content of these particular Welch's grape juice containers here. And then this is how we're going to get up to our 14.5% by measuring it with that. You'll see here, I've got some potassium bicarbonate. We might need this. I'm going to be testing the pH level of this with a pH tester. You guys don't have to do that. I'll do it for you because generally speaking, it should all be commercialized and about the same. So if I have to add some, you're probably going to have to add the same, but probably optional. Yeast does well at about 3.0 and above. Sometimes 2.9, especially with the Lavin K1 116, can do good at 2.9 or at least survive. But generally speaking, yeast likes to be in an environment 3.0 to about 4.0 is where it really thrives at. 3.2 to 4.0 even better. So we may have to raise the pH in this and add some of that, but we'll see. We have some acid. Conversely, I have no idea what the pH is going to be. So if it's too high, we may add some acid to get that in the range that we like to get it started. Pectic enzyme we're still going to use, although there's no actual fruit in this and it's just fruit juice, there is still pectin in here. And we're going to benefit from this in the clearing process, so to speak, by just putting that in the initial stages. Wine tannin, we're going to add about a half a teaspoon of this per gallon. There are 2 gallons here, one here and one here, together combined. So we're going to use a half a teaspoon, 2 teaspoons total. And if I didn't mention it, the pectic enzyme, same thing, a half a teaspoon per gallon, so 2 teaspoons total. You'll see here I have cadmium tablets. This is just to show you I'm not going to use these yet. You don't need these. This is a pasteurized juice commercially from the manufacturer, so to speak. So it is already generally a very clean environment. It's already been put out for consumption to the stores. So we're not going to use this yet, but we will use this at bottling, okay? So just something you'll need later. Here we have our Fermade K. This is what we're going to be using today, a half a gram per gallon. So today we're going to be using 2 grams of Fermade K as a yeast nutrient to give our yeast some jump start to get into that. Our Fermade O here, we're going to be adding this at 24 hours and at 48 hours, 0.6 grams per gallon, so 1.2 grams total in this particular batch at 24 hours, 1.2 grams at 48 hours, and then we're done. This is urea-free, and this is an all-natural nitrogen booster yeast nutrient for our yeast, so it works great, gets rid of any stress from the yeast, which can produce off flavors, off smells, things of that nature. So let's go ahead and get started with this. All right, so I can't remember the last time I had Welch's grape juice, so we're going to try it out in true winemaker fashion. We're going to use our nose glass here, tasting glass that I use whenever I'm bottling to make sure and during the processes to taste my wines. Imagine that, it smells very grapey. All right. Not as acidic or as tart as I thought it was going to be, so we may not have to adjust anything. And the sweetness is a little bit lower than I thought, actually. So I'm imagining we're going to have to add a little bit more sugar than usual. And if I didn't mention that in the beginning, you're going to need sugar. White table sugar, perfectly fine. All right, so let's go ahead and pour this into here. See if we can do this without spilling too much. There we go, not too bad. Let's see what the initial standard gravity and or percentage is here. Clear up some of these bubbles. Maybe raise this so you guys can actually see what I'm doing here. All right, let's see. So right out of the gate, we're sitting at about 6, 7, 8, 9%. So if this was to ferment all the way down to 1.000, which is standard gravity. When I'm making wine and in the initial stages, I'm just looking at the percentage. It's just easier. I'll get the standard gravity at some point. 6, 7, 8, 9. So we're at 9% just by the way coming out of the store. So we want to go to 14.5%. So we need to go up 5.5% alcohol. And we'll do that by adding sugar. All right, so now what we're going to do is we have a fermentation bucket here. Don't worry about the size as long as you have enough headspace to ferment. But if you think it's too big, it's not. This is a 6.5 gallon fermentation bucket. And I'm only using this because we're going to be pouring in a total of 2 gallons of volume of Welch's grape juice. So here we go. That's the first one. Whoop, do that a little bit more slowly. Is 64 ounces. So the first one is 64 ounces. The second one is 64 ounces. 128 ounces is 1 gallon. We have got 4 of these. So we have 2 gallons here. Whoop, 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 whoop. Make a mess. Yeah, so tip, pour slowly, just splattered it everywhere. Anyways, we're gonna pour these in and then we're going to start adding sugar. Now, rule of thumb is 1 pound of sugar for 1 gallon. We'll generally raise that gallon about 5, I think it's like 5 or 6%. I'll check my math to make sure. But what I'm gonna start out with, since we have 2 gallons here roughly, is about 1 pound, 12 ounces or so, because I wanna raise it from 9% to about 14.5, 15%. So I'm gonna start off with 1 pound, 12 ounces of sugar. You can, and if you don't have a bucket, you can ferment in whatever you have. If you wanna just ferment right into the Welch's grape juice container, you can do that as well. So let's add our sugar. All right, there's our 50-pound bag of sugar. We make a lot of wine. So, and there is our 1 pound and 12 ounces of sugar. Now what we're gonna do is just take that, get a better grip on it here. There we go. And we're just gonna pour that right into our soon-to-be wine, but our Welch's grape juice. You could also use water, warm it up, and get that sugar to dissolve first. Some people do that. It's a little bit easier to take your hydrometer readings or faster. But I'll just use a drill and a stirring wand, and I'll stir it up, and I'll show you that. All right, let's go ahead and get this stirred up. What we're looking for is just to get rid of the grinding sugar sound. With the drill, you can get it incorporated pretty quickly. All right, so I don't feel any more sugar in there, so we're nice and incorporated. All right, so let's take our first hydrometer reading after adding in that sugar. All right, so that put us right at about 13%, a little less. I was miscalculated my math there. It was for 2 gallons and not 1. So I'm gonna add in 1 more full pound. This is probably gonna put us at about 14.5, 15, I think. But let's see what we get out of it. All right, I know that's hard to see on the camera there, trying to get in focus, but it's right at 15. The 15 sitting right at the surface level. There's just a little bit of bubbles covering it, but it's right at 15%. So total sugar that we added was 2 pounds, 12 ounces for 2 gallons, put us at right at 15%. All right, so I checked the pH so you don't have to. It's at 3.49, which is actually a really good pH for most wines. 3.2 to like 3.6 is really that red wine area. So we're gonna go ahead and add in our mixed acid blend, a half a teaspoon per gallon. So we're gonna get 1 full teaspoon since we have 2 gallons here. And that will lower that acidity just a little bit more, give it a little more brightness, a little bit more acidity on the tongue when it's all nice and done. All right, so now we're gonna add in our half a teaspoon per gallon. I think I might have said 2 full teaspoons earlier, but it's half a teaspoon per gallon. So we just need 1 full teaspoon of our pectic enzyme here. Again, this is just gonna kind of help break down that pectin that's already in there and help us with clearing later. And then we're gonna add in our wine tannin. Again, half a teaspoon per gallon. So we're gonna have 1 full teaspoon of our wine tannin. This is gonna help give us some body to the wine since there's not really, or tannin, so to speak, that tannin mouthfeel, since there's not really any in here. Or if there is, it's very little. And then our acid blend, which is going to be that half a teaspoon per gallon. So again, 1 full teaspoon. And this is just that mixed acid blend there. All right, so we're gonna add our 1 full gram of our Fermaid K. This has DAP in it, which is our inorganic nitrogen for our yeast. It's a yeast nutrient. So this is gonna get our fermentation really jumping off the chain to begin with. It's really good. But this is gonna be the only time we add Fermaid K, and then the next 2 additions will be Fermaid O. So go ahead and add that in. Now I'm going to use the drill and the wand. I'm just going to incorporate all this in. And then we will go ahead and add our yeast. Usually we would wait 24 hours after Camden tablets has sanitized this, but this has already been pasteurized. So we're just gonna go ahead and add our yeast right away. All right, now that we've got all of our additives in here, with the exception of our yeast here, you can do one of two things. You can make a yeast starter, which is what I usually do for a lot of my wines. But for this Welch's grape juice, I'm just gonna go ahead and sprinkle this yeast, one packet right over the top of the must here. It'll be perfectly fine. It's not necessary every time to make a yeast starter, but you can if you want to. I'm just letting you know that there's some alternative ways. And then I'll gently stir that just a little bit. That's all we're gonna do. Just slowly, but there's a lot of foam here, which is the only reason I'm gonna give it a gentle little stir. Otherwise this yeast is gonna sit on top of that foam for a very long time until the foam goes down from the agitation process or the drill. And I'm just gonna give it a little bit of a stir so it gets incorporated into that must, that incorporating the rest of the additives and whatnot created a little bit of foam here. We'll let this sit until tomorrow morning, and then we will come back. For the next 5 days, we're gonna give this wine a stir once to twice a day. I prefer usually about twice a day whenever we've got a lot of fruit in there to push down that cap, so to speak, but there's no cap on this really. We're just gonna be stirring it, make sure that there's oxygen. Don't worry about this headspace during fermentation. Oxygen is our friend. The yeast needs the oxygen to convert the sugars into alcohol and to have a healthy environment, so that's perfectly fine. And this amount of headspace is not gonna hurt anything at all. Once we get into the refining process, that's when I'll show you to reduce your headspace and make sure that you're not inducing unnecessary oxygen. All right, so there is our Welch's grape juice in the wine room. Let's see all the other fun stuff we have in here. So we're gonna go ahead and let this ferment. Should take about anywhere from 6 to 9 days usually, and we'll see how it turns out. We'll start to see bubbles here probably by tomorrow midday, and we'll stir this again, like I said, next 5 days, twice a day, once in the morning and once at night, and then we'll wait till it gets down to that 1.000 specific gravity, meaning that has fermented completely, hopefully, and we get our full 15% alcohol content, and then we'll do our first rack. All right, guess what today is? It is day 13. It's our Welch's grape wine, or Welch's grape juice wine. You can see there, we are at 1.000, so we have fermented to dry. So we have a 15% alcohol by volume wine right now. Let's go ahead and get this on its first rack into secondary. I'm sure it'll ferment a little bit further, but let's go ahead and get this into the secondary. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the tools of the trade here that we're gonna be having. Obviously we have our wine that we're gonna be racking over. And I like these buckets. You can see where the wine level's at, kind of what size vessels, at least you might need. Let me move the light here a little bit. If you can see that dark line there, it's just about 2¼ gallons. That quarter is probably gonna be lees in the bottom of the bucket, so we probably won't get that out. We might get 2 gallons, or we might get less than 2 gallons. So let me talk about vessel size. Anybody who's made mead or wine for any period of time and makes it quite often has realized it can be frustrating to have headspace and nothing to fill it, that you don't want to use another wine or different kind of mead or anything like that. So I always recommend have plenty of sizes ready and available. These are 1 gallons, so maybe we'll get lucky and fill both of these up to the appropriate spot and the least amount of headspace, and maybe we won't. So if we don't, we also have, besides the 1 gallon, then we have a 32 ounce, and then we have a 64 ounce. So essentially we have all sizes to eliminate the headspace to the best amount possible. The only one that we probably won't use is gonna be this. This is gonna be specifically for our mixture of bentonite. We'll be adding bentonite today for our secondary. Here's our bentonite. Just follow the instructions here. It's gonna be 2 teaspoons for half a cup of warm water. I'll show you all that. We have our sanitized teaspoon, measuring right there. A little bit more tools of the trade here. We have our, if you've seen my other videos, you've seen this before, I'll try to be fast. So we have our funnel that we're gonna use to put our bentonite into our secondary container. I did take the hydrometer reading, you saw that, so I just sanitized that to put it back on my fermentation table. We have some airlocks. We also have the racking cane and the auto siphon and some lids for our different vessels and bungs and whatnot. And then a spray bottle because you never know when you're going to need to sanitize something. All right, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on introducing the auto siphon. If you've watched other videos or made wine or mead yourself or have racked those at any point. You know what this is, I won't bore you with it. The important things are, oh man, that smells amazing. If you could smell this, it smells like a grape varietal, which is kind of interesting since this is Welch's grape juice, but like an actual grape, like an actual wine grape varietal, like a Merlot or a Pinot Noir. It smells great. But anyway, back to the racking here. The goal is to hold this auto siphon about just like this at the surface level. We don't want to just drop it into the bucket because in the bottom of that is the gross lees from the fermentation where the yeast has died and fell to the bottom. So what we want to do is kind of follow this as it drains down. We want to follow this with the auto siphon all the way down, and then we'll tilt the bucket at the very end to try to avoid any of those gross lees on the bottom. You can see down there we've already got our tube into our carboys or our secondary vessels ready to go. So let's go ahead and get this started. All right, so we did end up getting 2 full 1 gallon secondary vessels here, which makes me very happy. So it was just, like I said, it was about 2 1/4 and about 2 1/4 gallons in the bucket, and about 1/4 of that was the lees. I'll show you in a second, but it looks great. For a Welch's grape juice, so that's Concord grape wine, it looks just like a grape varietal. I've done a lot of grape varietals. It looks just like a grape varietal. And like I said, that smells like a good Pinot or Merlot. I'm very excited about this. But let me show you the gross lees that we stayed away from there. So that's the waste that you'll have in just every batch that you make. Is just part of the process. You'll lose a little bit. That's why we make a little bit extra. But not too bad in here. But that's the gross lees. All right, so now what we're going to do is prepare our bentonite. This has already been in the microwave about a minute, actually, maybe a little less than a minute. It is almost at the boiling point, or it was. It's extremely warm, and that's because bentonite needs that to be able to turn into a clay. Otherwise, it will clump up. So we're going to put in, that's a 1/2 cup of water. We're going to put in 2 teaspoons of our bentonite, which is going to be 4 of these because they're 1/2 teaspoons. Now, the trick to this is sprinkling it in. Move around, sprinkle it in slowly. If you dump it all in the middle and you do it quickly, it will clump up on the bottom and will not mix properly. And also a mason jar is the best way that I have found to do this, because once I get the powder into the mason jar, I'll put the lid on and we'll shake it pretty vigorously, and that will turn it into the clay, that will turn it into the consistency that we're looking for. We're gonna shake that pretty vigorously until it gets to the consistency that we want, and it will take a little bit. All right, so that's about the consistency that you're gonna want. It's just about a thick, water, milky consistency, no clumps, or at least 99% of the clumps are gonna be gone. We'll go ahead and take the lid off of this. We'll let that cool off, and you'll see the steam coming out of there. It's pretty hot, so we're gonna let that cool off a little bit before we add it into our wine. You'll notice that whenever I racked these, I left a little bit of headspace. If I was really just gonna age this, I would fill it all the way up to the top right here. But I left a little bit of headspace, and that's because I'm gonna add this bentonite, and we need that space. So you can see I'm just gonna basically split this, or as much as we can at least get in there. And again, this funnel is sanitized. All right, that's about 1/2 of that mason jar. You can see it's going to immediately start to react with the wine there. All right, we'll pour the rest in here. There we go. And again, you see that reaction for a bit. All right, so we'll get this nice and incorporated and shooken up. All right, so now that the tops are off and we have our airlocks here, we're gonna go ahead and put these on. Obviously, these have already been sanitized. Everything, like we said, is sanitized. I keep reminding you that because that's important to keep things clean. Go ahead and put those on there. And you'll see these rubber bands. And in all of my videos, you'll always see these rubber bands, anything that's in one of these containers, even in the 3 gallon or in the 6 gallon containers. And that is to keep the little gremlins away at night. That like the little CO2 gremlins that like to come and push your bungs off of your carboys. And what that does is, left out overnight without an airlock and a bung in, you're going to oxidize your wine. And essentially, if it sits overnight, solid chance it's going to be a ruined wine. It may be okay, depending on what stage it's in. But generally speaking, it's not going to be as good as it could have been. And there you go. They're on the fermentation table with their brothers and sisters, so to speak. And they will just sit there, like I said, for the next 7 days, and we'll come and check on them. All right, so it is day 7 with our Welch's grape juice wine. But one of the indicators to really not go into the second step, if that's going to be super clear for you, is the bubbles around the top up here. So if you notice this is a little pro tip in terms of how a super clear works. Let me see if I can really light those up. You can see the bubbles that are still rising from the bottom with kind of the bentonite interaction and the CO2 gases still being released within the wine itself. And with those bubbles rising like that, what will happen if we were to add super clear into this? Super clear needs a still wine. And the main reason for that is because once you add in the first part, it's going to go into the wine, you're going to agitate it, and it's going to grab onto all those kind of particulates that are within the wine. Once you add the second part of super clear about an hour to 24 hours later, that is going to bind with the first part, and it's going to make those particles drop down to the bottom of the to the bottom of the wine. Now, if that gases, those CO2 gases are rising like this, what will happen is it will actually cause the super clear to suspend. So what it'll do is it will grab onto all those particulates throughout the wine, and instead of falling to the bottom, it will actually stop about right here, about midway through your wine or your mead, whatever you're doing at that point. It will actually stop about right here, and what you'll get is this real bad haziness about a third of the way up your wine or your vessel, your mead, whatever. And it'll just kind of be suspended there until all of those gases dissipate, and then it will take a little bit longer than usual for the rest of it to kind of fall to the bottom. And it can be very annoying because it kind of unnecessarily increases time within your wine clearing or your mead clearing. So just a kind of a pro tip, if you've ever used super clear or something like that, and you still had some gases and you're wondering like, why is this not clearing all the way? Why do I have this haze kind of midway through my wine? That's exactly why. The gases are still causing it to not clear properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait until these bubbles kind of go down or go away altogether. I'm going to let these bubbles that are rising up from the bottom kind of dissipate even more. If that means we need to give it another week like this, that's fine. We'll come back and I will show you what it looks like whenever we go to the next refining point, so you can kind of hone in on what you want to look for. All right, so today we're going to be taking our Welch's grape juice wine and adding in our super clear to get that second part of that real good refining process. You can see we've got some lees here from the bentonite. The bentonite is done to where I like it at this point. You can see a couple of little bubbles here at the top. That's not because there's CO2 rising anymore, but that's because I was moving the wine over here. So there's a little bit of agitation going on, which is normal. There is some tiny bit of residual CO2 inside the Welch's grape juice wine here, but not enough to affect our super clear. And that will all burn off as the next refining process takes place. So let's go ahead and get this racked. All right, so all I did here with our super clear is cut it. It comes in one pack. Ketosol and chitosan. This is going to be added in right now. We're just going to pour this in, and you can see all I did was kind of just get the fluid down, eyeballed it at halfway. So I can get that to focus real quick. I eyeballed it kind of halfway, and that's what we're going to do, is just split this between the two vessels here. I'm not too worried about making it exact. You could weigh this out in grams. I've never had an issue with it doing it this way. So, but think about it like this. This is up to 5 gallons. So, but putting a little bit more into a 1 gallon on each isn't going to hurt anything. So we're going to put in half here, half here. So let's go ahead and do that. So while we're waiting for this hour, I did want to mention, you can see they're on my fermentation table here. Put these wherever they're going to be seated for the next 7 to 10 days. And the reason for that is because when we pour this in, it has to be very slow, and we want it to trickle down. You don't want to be walking with these and agitating them right after you pour this. All right, so it has been an hour. We're going to go ahead and add our chitosan in. We're just going to cut this corner off. We have 1 ounce of warm water in here that we're going to dissolve our chitosan into. And again, we're just going to split this between the two vessels here. All right, so there you have it. Our super clear, both parts, is officially added. Now we're just going to wait for the next. Super clear is actually really quick, and you'll see in about 24 to 72 hours, these are going to be fairly clear. All right, so here we are. It has only been 3 days since I have put the super clear into our Welch's grape juice. And you can see, I put a flashlight here. We are clear all the way down to the leaves there at the bottom. So it looks nice. I'm gonna go ahead and get this ready for bottling. I always do this, if you watch my videos, 24 hours before bottling. We are gonna add in our potassium sorbate, half a teaspoon per gallon, so 1 to each of these, and then 1 candem tablet. And that is to allow the potassium sorbate and the candem tablets to set up in the wine the night before and do their thing and get really incorporated into the wine before we start adding sugar to prevent any further fermentation in the bottle. And it works really well. At this point, what you were going to do is you were going to be racking. I'm not going to capture that, so go ahead and rack your wine into a new vessel. Stay away from the lees here. A little bit behind the scenes that I always show, I will be filtering my wine instead of racking. It's just a little bit of an extra step, but go ahead and rack this. Don't worry about this. 99% of people do not filter their wine. This is just to make it sterile filtered. So rack it and we'll come back. All right, so my filtering is done. Your racking should be done at this point. You can see how brilliant. That's one of the reasons I really love filtering wine. Racking is great, but you're not going to achieve this brilliance, generally speaking, without a lot more time investment in terms of natural sediment. But that being said, we're going to add in a half a teaspoon of our potassium sorbate. Even though they're not full gallons, they're pretty close, so it'll be just fine. This is just wine that I pulled out of there, and we're going to mix it in here first so we don't agitate our wine too much. Crush a tablet in there. One thing you'll notice that I always mention in every video is the color change in your wine here because of the sulfites and the potassium sorbate. Don't freak out. Once you put that into the larger vessel here, it's not going to affect your color. So we'll get that dissolved. I'll add that in with my sanitized funnel to both. I won't bore you with that, but all we're going to do is add that in. We're going to wait our 24 hours, and tomorrow is bottling. Today is the day, my favorite day. We're going to go ahead and bottle up this Welch's grape juice wine. So I'll just really briefly say all the things that you're going to need. Won't bore you to death here. You're going to need your wine. You're going to need a secondary vessel just like that. Fermentation bucking works perfectly because we're going to mix our sugar for our back sweetening in that. You're going to need some bottles, obviously. These are all nice and sanitized on my bottle tree here. That's in the description. Love this thing. You're going to need some corks. I'll be taking a pH reading. You won't need to do that. But if you're interested in that, let me know. I'll do a video on that. But I'll be checking the pH and I'll let you know what it is in the final little taste there. And then you're going to need your tools. I'll be having my, call this my fancy turkey baster. This is what I'll use to get the wine out, to do my tastings. A funnel to put the sugar into this mason jar. The reason I do that is because I will put wine into this and mix the sugar in here for back sweetening rather than having to stir up the entire batch of wine. It just reduces the amount of oxygen overall. Once I get it kind of dissolved in there, I'll use my stirring wand. That will then mix up the wine to incorporate the sugar that's already been pretty much dissolved. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so it's at this point that you can really kind of see exactly how much wine you got in here. So after our whole process, starting with those 2 gallons, we ended up with about 1.75 gallons here. Remember, for every gallon, you're gonna get 5 full-size bottles, 750 milliliter bottles. So if we have about a little over about 1.75 gallons, we will likely get 5 full bottles and then probably 4 to 5 of the smaller bottles. I've been doing this a lot lately where I do a 750 milliliter bottle and then the smaller 357 milliliter bottles. These are great for handing out for tastings and things of that nature to see if people actually like the wine. So let's go ahead and start sweetening this up and get started. This is our sweetened, back sweetened Welch's grape juice wine, and this is our original. You can see it's really hard to tell from the camera there, but I wish you could see this in person. This has a much more of a gloss to it. It also has a little bit of like viscosity. Like if you think of oil, not that that's, I don't want to make it a bad thing here, but it adds more weight to the overall liquid. It looks better, it feels better in the mouth. This is a little bit more watery. So just something to think about when you add in that sugar. That's the benefit of it. But this is perfect. If I could, what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of an on-camera tasting here in a second, and we'll talk about it. But I did take a standard gravity reading. I think that's a little bit easier. I put in a total of 240 grams of sugar, but your volume might be a lot different than mine. So for my level of sweetness that I think people are going to like in general, we're right at 1.130 specific gravity. So 1.130 specific gravity is what we ended up with our back sweetening. That's a lot easier for you to probably achieve that 1.130 than adding in grams because your volume may be different, your sweetness may be different. And if you're trying to achieve the same sweetness that I did, 1.130. So let's go ahead and get this in the bottle. All right, and our last bottle here. All right, guys, there you have it. As expected, we got 5 full-size 750 milliliter bottles, and we got 6 of our smaller called splits, which are exactly half of our full-size bottle. Welcome to our Welch's grape juice wine. It is a high alcohol content at 15.74% alcohol by volume, which is why I named it the adult juice box. A lot of fun with this one. Let's do an on-camera tasting. I'll give you a little bit of my thoughts and we'll conclude this video. All right, guys, so we have finished our Welch's grape juice wine. Let's go ahead and do an official taste for you. I got the purple light on back there for the Welch's grape juice. We're all inspired by Welch's grape juice right now. All right, on the nose, it's immediately that sweet candied grape. If you could picture, those of you that are wine drinkers, if you could picture a Pinot, it smells like a light Pinot. All right, the initial flavor that hits you right in the tongue is going to be like a balanced, fruity, but candied grape. Not your traditional like grape varietal grape, more of a candied sucker type grape. All right, I'm completely impressed with Welch's grape juice wine. This is why we make wine. This is why we get into the hobby, because it's for exciting things like this, where you take something so simple and make it into a delicious drink. All right, so the acidity I mentioned before was 3.66. Perfect for this. It's got a short to medium finish. For those of you that don't know what that means, short to medium time that it stays in your mouth before it is gone and down the throat. So after I drink it, it sticks around and it's gone. So then that's good. That's a good thing because it's not watery. The body is kind of like light body to medium, not full medium, but right in that portion there with that sugar added. Very impressed that we're able to do all that hard work and get a Welch's grape juice with nothing else but Welch's grape juice and sugar and time and effort to get it into this great wine. Keep in mind, it is a young wine. It's a new wine. It's a fresh wine, all those things. It will only benefit from time and aging. But right now, if it's any indication of how this is going to be in 6 months or a year, I'm very excited to share this with other folks. So definitely a win in my book. Tell me what you guys think. Did you have fun? Did you learn something? Did you get something out of the video? If you did, please like the video. Small channel, just trying to grow here. Please subscribe to the channel. Helps me out. Until the next time, cheers.